Aristotle said, if you would understand anything, observe its beginning and its development. That is very important. So we're going to focus on the West for the most part. And we'll start with ancient Greece, as so many things in history tend to. Schools in ancient Greece were generally private and voluntary. But there was an exception in the ancient Greek world, which was compulsory schooling in the militaristic city-state of Sparta. Now, Sparta was a very militaristic, very fascistic city-state, as opposed to still slave-dependent, but slightly more gentle and egalitarian and philosophical Athens. And the conflict between Athens and Sparta is one of the foundational conflicts in Western history. You could really say Plato is Sparta and Aristotle is democracy. So Spartan boys back in the day were forcibly taken from their mothers at the age of 7, and they were sent to public school for 12 years until they were 19 to become citizens who were, and I quote, obedient to the word of command, capable of enduring hardships and victories in battle. And they all had to talk like this. And these descriptions of this kind of government schooling are available through history, through literature. Plato, who was an admirer of Spartan culture, had considerable influence over the development of public education theory, and in his famous dialogue, The Laws, he wrote, quote, there shall be compulsory education, and the pupils shall be regarded as belonging to the state rather than to their parents. Now, human beings, we imprint. We're like ducklings, doing those experiments where they put an orange balloon in front of ducklings, and the ducklings just follow the balloon. We imprint, like just about every species that has relationships with its parents, we imprint on those who raise us. And governments kind of raise us these days, which is why nationalism is so strong, and why if you talk about alternatives to particular government solutions, people think that you're, like, emotionally it sort of hits them like you're banishing their parents or something. Plato also envisioned a minister of education whose influence was crucial in his dictatorship. He wrote, of all the great offices of state, this is the greatest, the minister of education. Now, this shifted in the Roman Empire. Education was generally private and a voluntary matter. As the Roman philosopher Cicero noted, quote, our ancestors did not wish that children should be educated by fixed rules determined by the laws, publicly promulgated, and made uniform for all. And in many ways, the Roman Empire, was more free, certainly more free than Sparta, and more free than certain elements of the Greek city-states. Now, not much is known about the Dark Ages, and not much formal education outside of the monasteries was occurring. The European Middle Ages and early modernity, there was no such thing as compulsory state-run systems of education. There was instead a network of private institutions, and the great thing with private institutions is that they have to satisfy the values and requirements of the parents. So this is so fundamental and foundational. Why can't you talk about anything really important in a government school? Like the existence of deities, like what is morality, what is justice, what is truth, what is virtue, the things that kids are really fascinated in. Instead, you just get this general buckshot of useless trivia. When was the War of 1812? The British North American Acts. Oh man, it's brutal, and it's just a series of rote, dull memorization, because government schools cannot afford to offend, because they cannot select students by the values of their parents. And so when you have mixed values in a community, when they all get together in school, you don't end up with a stimulating debate of contrary values. You end up with anything of any importance being scrubbed from the curriculum. And so nobody's going to be offended if you learn when the Declaration of Independence was published. But if you start going more deeply into values that may offend certain parents, then you end up in trouble. You end up with problems, with complaints, with so on. So this is one of the foundational reasons as to why you simply cannot have anything of foundation or importance or interest being taught in public schools. It's just a series of brain stringing out nonsense. Of course, in the maths and science is less so. There's no value. In the Middle Ages and early modernity, wealthy families would hire tutors to, and you can see this all over the place in literature, governesses and so on. The children of commoners attended Latin schools. Of course, you needed to learn the Latin language. Up until the 15th century, it was impossible, pretty much, to get the Bible in the vernacular. It was in Latin or Greek, or I suppose Hebrew, but until Martin Luther came along and translated the Bible into the vernacular with the creation of the printing press, the Westerners had the capacity to actually read the Bible for themselves, which is one of the things that took a hammer to the fragile ice glass of Catholic Christendom. The historian James Van Horn Melton wrote, quote, Frank's schools sought to create a completely regulated and self-enclosed environment, neutralizing the impact of the outside environment, and thus ridding pupils of any bad habits they might have developed outside the institution. Now, the birth of the modern public school system, Otto von Bismarck, not just a very, very powerful warship, but a Prussian statesman, unified Germany in a series of conquests, forming the German Empire in 1871. By that time, school attendance was universal and compulsory in Germany. The Prussian public schools were widely praised for their efficiency in creating factory workers and soldiers, which are the two things for the military-industrial complex. The expansion of German militarism required